Hello, Hal here. Welcome back to my Bannerlord Raider Guide, Part 3 to be exact. As you're well aware of, in Part 1 we've discussed all the raiding strategies you can use to enrich yourself at the expense of others, and in Part 2 we've talked about how to create your bandit character, as well as how to properly train his skills, among other perfectly legal things. Today we'll be discussing a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is convincing people to join the channel, your band of outlaws. Jokes aside, today we'll focus on three main topics: what troop types to recruit, how to recruit them, and how to put them to good use throughout your playthrough, from the very beginning of your raider campaign up until the end game. We might be here for a while, so grab yourself something to drink or a snack, and prepare to learn something that in all honesty you probably already know if you've played this game. But I'm hoping you'll still find out something new today. After all, this is coming from someone who has spent quite a bit of time in Calradia. Alright, let's first talk about the regular kind of recruitment, before we dive into alternative methods. Under normal circumstances, you recruit soldiers by visiting settlements, talking to the local landowners, and paying them a finder's fee for any lads that want to join you. If this whole recruitment bar is grey, it means the notables do not like you very much, so you'd best improve your relations ASAP. The better your relations, the higher the quality and quantity of troops the landowner will send your way. There's several ways to do this. Simply being a part of their faction is enough to free up a few additional volunteers, and this can be done when you become a mercenary or a lord of this faction, or simply when you conquer the settlement yourself. But on its own, that isn't enough to make the notables give you all of their recruits, so try to look for perks that make people like you more, or enact kingdom policies that prioritize the loyalty of your subjects, and over time, they'll give you access to more and more soldiers. Another thing you can do to increase the amount of warriors you recruit from towns or villages is to simply do favors for the locals. Bring them grain or tools or animals, refuse their monetary compensation if the option is available, and generally be a really nice guy towards them. But this guide is for people who do not know the meaning of nice. After all, I didn't label this as how to be an honorable and merciful lord of the realm. No. This is a guide for psychopathic outlaws, and since you'll have already disregarded everyone's opinion of you in the trash bin, where it belongs, you're gonna have to look for alternative methods of recruiting manpower for your raiding operations. If you've not pissed off everyone, you could still rely on conventional methods of recruitment, but if you've done like Ukzug and the entire world is painted red, then alternatives are all you'll have. Alternative number 1, and the first method Ukzug used to make friends, is to beat some looters into submission. Either use a blunt weapon or prayer, whichever you prefer. The key to this recruitment method is to have the looters get injured instead of outright killed. Necromancy hasn't yet been introduced as a mechanic in Bannerlord. If it were, this guy would probably practice it. After you've knocked some teeth out of looters' mouths, take them prisoner, and after some time, they will offer to join you. Once your looter party grows, you can use them to ambush mountain or desert or forest bandits, and if by some miracles you can catch steppe raiders, those as well. And just like you've done with the looters, if you smash them with a blunt object, they can be imprisoned and eventually they'll offer to join your ranks. I mean, riding along the man who impaired their ability to chew food is preferable to being dragged along as a prisoner. At least if they follow you, they'll get to vent their frustrations on your next batch of victims, and if they're lucky enough, even live a long and comfortable life from the spoils you shared with them. Of course, prisoner recruitment isn't limited to bandits. You can do this to anyone. Peasants, caravan guards, soldiers of lords you've defeated, they will all join you sooner or later. There are a few perks which speed up that process, mainly in the roguery and leadership skills, but they are not an absolute requirement. One thing I noticed, however, is that the fewer prisoners you have, the faster they will join you, so that's something to keep in mind if this is your go-to recruitment method. And if you want to use this technique to get a lot of top-tier bandits, you should equip a mace and a shield and start raiding their hideouts. Try to score as many takedowns as you can, and when you finally face the big boss, duel him, and after you beat some sense into him, his lieutenants will be apprehended as well. It's going to take a bit of time for these bandits to suck up their pride and join your gang, and if you lack the virtue of patience, you can instead take them to the nearest mining settlement and find them some gainful employment, in exchange for a large bag of money. But what do you do if you have a lot of prisoners and they're slowing you down? Well, you could try to sneak into the nearest town and sell them to the ransom broker, but chances are you'll just get caught by the guards and get your ass thrown in the dungeon. But that is actually not a bad thing. I mean, sure, you get deprived of your freedom for a few days or weeks, but while you serve your sentence, you're also freed from your responsibilities, such as keeping your soldiers fed or paying their wages. And while you rot in prison, your gang will patiently wait for their boss to get out of jail, and while you were in there, some, if not most of your prisoners, are now ready to join you as well. This isn't the most efficient method of gaining new recruits, but hey, you might find this info useful. But an even better use of this mechanic is to figuratively use it as a get out of jail free card. Technically you're getting into jail, but if you're being chased by a lord and he's closing in, it's actually better to try to sneak into town, multiple times if you have to, and let the guards catch you and throw you in the dungeon. Because here's the thing, if a lord with 200 soldiers catches your party of 100 men, you have almost no chance of winning the battle, so you will lose all of your troops as well as a large portion of your loot. If you surrender to this lord, again, you'll lose a portion of your loot, most of your horses, and your 100 soldiers will get imprisoned and you'll never see them ever again. But if you let the town guards arrest you, all you'll lose is the time you spend rotting away in prison. All your loot, horses, and soldiers will still be there when you finally get out, and by that time, the pursuing lord will most likely have left to pursue other endeavors. And to repeat myself, some of your prisoners will decide to join you by the time you get out. Anyway, when your party has enough looters or bandits or whatever, and you're no longer hiring, throw your mace away and equip a sharp or pointy object, and use it to murder your enemies and take their stuff. This thing right here called Battle Loot, that's the gear dropped by fallen soldiers, and you don't get a lot of it if the enemy just got KO'd, so basically, if you want prisoners, bludgeon your enemies with a mace. If you want loot, slice them open. But I digress. Once you have 30 lads or more, you can move on to alternative number 2 of making friends. Forced conscription. You see, the landowners I talked about earlier are not going to willingly part with their recruits if they don't like you. Keyword is willingly. But if you show enough force, they will give you some of their recruits, regardless of their personal whims and wishes. The only other option they have is to get murdered and have the soldiers taken from the village afterwards. But because they prefer their heads to still be attached to their bodies, they'll part with the lads after you've helped fertilize their crops with their own militia. If you want to know what troops you're about to conscript by using this method, you can go to the Recruit Volunteers window and take a look at the soldiers that are stationed here. Conscription forces the first 3 available recruits from each notable to join you, which usually means you'll be scraping the bottom of the barrel, but if the noobs were taken away by some lord just before your friendly visit, the troops you get will be better. There's also this exploit which I'd like to share with you. If you force notables to give you recruits, you'll get the worst ones. That has already been established. If you try to do this again immediately after, this option becomes grayed out. But if you save your game and immediately reload, you will be able to forcefully conscript the next batch of soldiers, which will be better and better, and this can earn you some top tier units in no time. I'm pretty sure this exploit will be patched out soon, and for once I wouldn't mind. After all, that's why I mentioned it. I'm not particularly fond of using exploits myself, although I don't mind anyone else doing it for their own enjoyment until the developers do their job and patch them out. Alternative number 3 is still about using an excessive amount of force, but this time it is for the noble purpose of rescuing people from captivity. Just like you carry helpless looters and villagers as prisoners, so do other parties. Maybe a group of bandits got lucky and managed to ambush a caravan and kidnapped the surviving guards, hoping to ransom them somewhere, but whoops! They had the misfortune of meeting you. So you attack these outlaws, and after they're either killed or captured, The caravan guards you just rescued will voluntarily join your party. After all, they owe you a life debt that can only be repaid by helping you raid caravans, just like the one they were escorting before they got ambushed. And if they die in your service, that's a small price to pay for salvation. This is a rare but rewarding manner of recruitment, as the troops you liberate can be a lot better than those you may obtain through the previous methods. Especially if you rescue prisoners of war from an army that just barely survived a close encounter with their enemies. I once managed to defeat an army of 1,000 Saranids with just 100 men, because 950 of those guys were in no condition to fight after they've been starved for a week as they laid siege to a castle. A lot of the soldiers I released that day were elite troops, who would have been a great addition to my army if I didn't exclusively employ mounted archers. To see who actually carries prisoners and who's not, just hold the Alt key to see details about all the parties roaming the map. If a party looks like this, then some damsels are in distress, and you shall be the brave knight who will rescue them from the miscreants, and when you do, they will join your band of miscreants. This should not be your primary manner of recruitment, but if the opportunity presents itself, you should just grab it. But the best recruitment method for a bandit king is intimidation, which can simply be described as convincing smaller gangs of bandits to join your bigger gang of bandits. To bully the outlaws into joining you, you need 3 things. The first of these prerequisites is party size. They say size doesn't matter, but let me tell you, that's a lie. Because if your gang consists of 20 ragged yokels, that's not enough to intimidate even a single looter, even though fighting all of you is a death sentence for him. You need at least 50 men in your party, maybe even more. Because if the bandits aren't hopelessly outnumbered, then they'll simply throw their lives away. My regiment of 200 men can easily convince a gang of 20 outlaws to join us, but parties of 30 or 40 or 50 will usually refuse your generous offer of employment, preferring instead to die. But if your party is too large, then your movement speed will decrease, so you have to either legally or illegally obtain some horses or even cavalry units, in order to keep your party speed above 5 or even 6 if you can go that high. Speed is requirement number 2, by the way. And the third and final piece of the intimidation puzzle is the Scarface perk. Technically the perk is optional, but believe me, that 30% surrender chance makes a lot of difference. I was never able to convince a party of 30 brigands to join me before obtaining that ability. Once these 3 requirements are met, all you have to do is chase bandit parties, and when you catch up, simply tell them to surrender or die. Some will obviously let pride be their downfall, but those who are smart will instead offer to join your gang in exchange for their lives. And since that's what you wanted in the first place, of course they'll be welcome with open arms in your band of misfits. But as I've said earlier, large gangs of 30 bandits or more will almost always refuse to join, even if you have 200 men. So if you really want to add some of these fellers to your roster, you're gonna have to use the squeezing technique I've shown you in part 1. Tell them to surrender, and if they refuse, you attack. After you render a few of them unconscious, the remaining bandits will start running away, and when that happens, stop the attack and let them escape. Then approach them again and make them the same offer. If they still refuse, kill half and let the others run. Eventually they won't have enough manpower to actually put up a fight, at which point they might join you. But some are extremely stubborn and will refuse to comply out of sheer contempt, so don't waste too much time on them. My rule is 3 strikes and they're out. If they say no 2 times, I will attack them and kill half each time. If they say no a 3rd time, I'll simply send my men to kill all the rest and imprison those who refused to die. But what if you want to recruit Steppe Bandits? Well, that's a real conundrum. Because if a party of Steppe Brudas is small enough to be intimidated, then it's probably extremely fast and you won't be able to catch them. And the parties you can catch are probably too large to let themselves be intimidated, so what do? Well, if you remember the ambush spots I've shown you in part 1 of this raider guide, you can try to guide the bandits into a dead end and corner them there. or you can just wander around and keep an eye out for small parties that may move slower than others of their kind, because you see, these nomads are so damn effective at raiding peasants and caravans that they will often be absolutely loaded with trade goods and prisoners, and that will actually slow them down to a crawl. You could safely say that steppe bandits are the victims of their own success, and that's what allows you to easily catch up to them and force them to join your crew. But if they put up a fight, try to not let any of them escape, because when you win, you will take their loot and prisoners, which actually were the things that slowed them down in the first place, and they will manage to make their escape, never to be seen again. What I'm trying to say is, steppe bandits are too quick to be squeezed. If they say no, simply send your soldiers to have them all killed or injured, then recruit those you've imprisoned. And yeah, in case it wasn't clear, if you want to completely eliminate a party, don't join battles yourself. When you do, the enemy morale eventually breaks and they will start running away. And some of them can escape, but if you send your troops to do the dirty work for you, the enemy will fight to the last man, and a portion of them will just get some minor injuries, allowing you to take them captive and eventually add them to your ranks. One last thing about intimidation. Towards the late game, when you start losing soldiers by the hundreds, this will be your primary method of recruitment. Say if you want a lot of bandit troops real fast, all you gotta do is visit nearby hideouts and keep an eye out for bandits patrolling the area. When I'm at this stage, I no longer destroy bandit hideouts because they make for excellent employment centers. Finally, there's mercenaries. There's not much I can say about these guys. You just enter a town, or sneak inside if you're an outlaw, pay a visit to the tavern and recruit anyone who's available. Mercs are expensive, but they're some of the best troops when fully upgraded. But I think that's everything. Let's recap. Recruitment, imprisonment, conscription, rescues, intimidation, and mercenaries. Are there any methods of obtaining soldiers that I've left out? Probably not, but if you think of other alternatives, leave them in a comment. I'll even pin it if it's particularly filled with new information. And I guess that concludes the first chapter of today's guide. But before we move on to chapter 2, I'd like you to do something for me. If you found this video to be helpful, you can return the favor by helping it reach 5,000 likes. It only takes a second to press the button, and it's the best way of supporting this type of content. Alright, now that we've discussed various methods of recruitment, let's move on to the part where we take a look at what troop types are most useful to recruit throughout the various stages of your raider campaign. Oh boy, I'm gonna have to pick favorites, aren't I? I hate picking favorites. All troops are useful in their own way, even the lowest of the low, but we'll judge these soldiers based on availability, utility, as well as disposability. Because let's be honest, not every one of your gangmates is going to survive the carnage you'll lead them into, and they know it. Live fast, die young. That's their motto, and they've fully accepted their fate. I will absolutely not analyze each and every unit in the game, as that would take too much time. I'll simply talk about the best troops to recruit, depending on what kind of operations you're running, because you won't be sieging castles with the same army you've robbed caravans with. Now, I will assume you've followed part 2 of this guide and obtained this perk in leadership, or at the very least you intend to do it at some point. Towards the late game, you'll be hiring a lot of bandits, and they will eventually need to be upgraded into elite troops. Let's start with the scum of Calradian society, the looters. These guys quite literally litter the continent. They're everywhere, sometimes even in large numbers, and they're quite eager to join a thriving gang of outlaws, but they are only useful in the early game to be used as cannon fodder against peasants and actual bandits, until you capture these better troops and have them replace the looters. Once that's done, lutieres are complete trash that should only be recruited if you have nothing better to add to your army. But after you've obtained the Veterans Respect perk, these lads become useful once again, simply because they can be recruited in huge numbers and then trained into the humble Tier 2 Imperial Infantry, which are not the best troops available, but at least they have a shield, allowing them to draw enemy fire while your archers dish out massive amounts of damage. And if these Imperial footmen survive long enough, they may even see themselves become legionaries, which are some of the best infantry units in Calradia. But let's not put the cart before the horse. These are already late game tactics that should be discussed after we've laid a solid foundation on the corpses of those you've raided. Now, because I am about to begin a new raider campaign myself, using the same start as in this video in which the entire world is hostile, we shall continue discussing this subject from the lens of my bandit character. What would Balin do? When he starts, he has absolutely nothing, and nobody will join him willingly, that much is certain. So maybe he'll fight for his life, obtain some new weapons, and once he's got some basic equipment, he can start recruiting a few lackeys to help him climb the ranks. As I've already said, looters will be the first troops he adds to his roster. Using a spear and a horse, one could easily fight about 6 looters at once, and when half of those lie dead, the rest will start to scatter. At that point, you can use a mallet to smack them over the back of the head, take them prisoner, and wait for them to join you. Rinse and repeat until you have 15 to 20 looters, at which point you're ready to go after your next victims. Mountain Bandits. Hillmen are complete trash. They're no better than looters, but unlike those monkeys, the Hillmen can be upgraded into useful troops without any special perks. Brigands are not the sharpest tools in the shed, but at the very least, they're versatile. They have a shield for blocking arrows, they have a spear for dealing with cavalry, they have an axe to break the shields of hostile infantry, and of course, they have a bag of javelins that can kill an enemy in one hit. Best of all, they're disposable, because mountain bandits can always be coerced into joining your gang as the game progresses and your party grows. But if they survive, they can be given a cheap horse to upgrade themselves into highwaymen, which are my favorite cavalry units in the game, excluding horse archers. Let me tell you why highwaymen are perfect for a raider. First of all, they're just as versatile as the brigands. Shield, axe, spear, javelins. If you have 20 of these, you can raid any party of peasants, no matter how large. Order them to hold fire until they approach their victims, and when that happens, fire at will. Secondly, these guys are one of the few tier 4 cavalry units that use a regular mount instead of a warhorse, and that makes them relatively disposable for such a high value unit. But if you have the vet's respect, you might be tempted to turn these boys into Vlandian champions. And if you're a mythillionaire who owns hundreds of warhorses, go ahead and upgrade them. For me, it's kind of a downgrade, because even though they gain a lot of armor and deadly melee equipment, they lose their javelins and their replaceability, which are the best advantages of the highwaymen. After I get some brigands in my party, I start chasing sea raiders and forest bandits, which are among the best outlaw troops to have. Seamen are great infantry units who can hold the line with their shields and harass your enemies with javelins, while foresters are some of the best archers in Calradia, especially after they've been upgraded into Battanian Fians, assuming this perk's unlocked. There's also desert bandits, but they're kind of a mixed bag. Their tier 3 cavalry is okay if you want to boost your traveling speed, but their lack of shields renders them almost useless in combat. The tier 4 Harami are pretty good, they're slightly improved highwaymen, but not only do you have to waste a horse to transform a Bedouin into a nomad, but then you gotta waste a warhorse to upgrade the nomad into the Harami, and that can get pretty expensive, so I don't really bother with them. Then there's Steppe Bandits. We talked about these lads already. If you can somehow catch them and recruit them, they're the only troops you need for early game raiding. They move quickly, they can shoot, and they're perfect for attacking either bandits or peasants. Actually, only marauders can do that. The tier 2 Steppe Bandit is an even worse version of the Desert Nomad, and the tier 4 raiders require warhorses, which aren't particularly easy to obtain. If you're aiming for a bandit-only, cavalry-only warband, highwaymen and marauders are your best options. But some steppe gangs already come with a few raiders, and if you get these guys to join you willingly, they're some of the best troops you can enlist. But do not upgrade marauders into raiders until you've unlocked the perk I keep shoving in your face. Once you get to that one, the raiders can be trained into Khan's guards, which are the scariest fucking things you can see on the battlefield. A horde of those will bring the entire world to ruin. Luckily for the world, such a golden horde is not easy to assemble. But why bother with bandits when you can conscript actual soldiers? Now the question is, who are you going to conscript? Stygians? Vlandians? Aserai? They're all good choices, but there's only 2 troops that I'm aiming for in the early game, when range and mobility are everything. The Tier 3 Kuzeet Raider and the Tier 5 Imperial Busalari. Let's talk about these 2 mounted archer troops and draw some comparisons between them. If you go to the Kuzeet steppe and start conscripting people, most of your new recruits will be nomads. Or peasants if you don't dare attack a village. After a bit of training, the peasants or nomads will become Kuzeet tribesmen, which in my opinion are the best but also the most expensive tier 2 units, because in addition to their regular upgrade cost, you will also need to give them a standard horse, which costs somewhere between 200 to 500 dinars, if you choose to purchase instead of adhering to raider tradition. When the tribesmen score a few kills, they can be upgraded into raiders, which are exactly what you want, decent and affordable mounted archers. But when they level up again, these raiders could be developed into Kuzeet horse archers, but in order for that to happen, you will also need to give each of them a warhorse. What happens to the standard horse that the raider was riding on before he got upgraded? It vanishes into thin air. Gone. Reduced to atoms. But if you take an honest, hard-working Imperial, you train him to use a bow and he becomes a veteran ranger, you can instead give him the warhorse and you have yourself an armored, mounted archer that's just as strong as his Kuzeet counterpart, without vaporizing a poor saddle horse in the process. So if I have a combination of Imperial and Kuzeet troops in my warband, the Steppe Bros are already mounted archers from tier 2, even before I give them warhorses. But Imperials are snotty bastards who won't ride anything but the best, and if I give the warhorses to the Kuzeets, the imps remain dismounted. So instead of wasting 2 horses on 1 soldier, I give a simple horse to the Kuzeet and a war mount to the Imperial. Get it? Got it? Good. But there is another reason why I recommend training Imperials. Availability. Kuzeets are great and I wouldn't have a problem maxing them out, but what do I do if I'm stuck in the western part of the map? Eventually, some of my troops will perish, and for every horseman that falls in battle, my warband loses a bit of cohesion each and every time, and the cavalry will eventually be replaced by Imperial archers, which can only be trained back into cavalry with warhorses. Therefore, they get the more expensive mounts while the Kuzeets remain cheap and reliable. And whenever I find myself in the eastern part of Calradia, I'll replace some of my infantry units with Khergits once more. Now, to clear any confusion. When I say Kuzeets shouldn't get warhorses, I only mean the raiders. But if you manage to conscript Kuzeet nobles and you have the option of giving them a warhorse, you absolutely should, because number 1, they already come with a free horse, so you don't waste 2 mounts on a single unit, and number 2, the Kangli eventually becomes a Khan's Guard, which, as I've already mentioned, is the best horse archer in Calradia. But if you want mounted archers, shouldn't you also employ Aserai Mamelukes? Yeah, but mostly no. If you do some forced conscription in an Aserai village and the notables give you Mamluk cavalry, that's great. But if you get basic recruits, you shouldn't bother training them into mounted archers because they are the embodiment of midlife crisis. To elaborate on that, the recruit trains into tier 2 shielded infantry, which can then be given a basic horse to become a tier 3 melee cavalry unit, which can then be given a warhorse to finally become a mounted archer. And you already know how I feel about wasting 2 horses on the same unit. If you absolutely want Aserai cavalry, stick to the Mamluk regular, which is a solid tier 3 troop, with a spear, a sword and a shield. These guys aren't great, but having cavalry in your army boosts your map mobility, and you may find that useful early on in your campaign. And if you don't have any horses to upgrade your footmen into cavalry, allow me to give you some tried and true methods for obtaining them. Method number 1 is to simply buy them. If you're a mercenary or a lord and you're still able to enter towns, they are your most reliable option. But if you're an outlaw that's been completely ostracized from civilized society, you can only purchase horses from towns that rebelled against their current masters, or from villages that are selling them. But what if you don't want to spend your money? What do you do then? Well, you can wait for a group of villagers from a horse ranch to visit the market to try to sell their horses. So hover on the village, see what town it's bound to, and put yourself in between the 2 settlements. If the village has this icon on top of it, it means the peasants are home, so you must wait for them to depart. When they do, the icon will disappear, indicating that it's time to prepare your ambush. So give chase to the peasants, and when you catch up, you can either squeeze them or rob them. Doing so early on is tricky, however, because the peasants will ride on those horses and it's possible they'll move faster than you. And if that's the case, try to guide them into an ambush spot. You may also obtain basic horses from caravans you've raided, but just like the aforementioned cowboys, they'll also move very quickly. So you'll have to catch them in an ambush spot, or in a forest if you're Battanian, or in the desert if you're Aserai. And of course, another method of obtaining mounts is defeating enemy lords. If a lord had any cavalry in his army, you'll get to claim a few of the horses left behind by these fallen warriors. But what about warhorses? After all, most high-tier riders will require these, and it's not like they grow on trees. Well, if you have the money you could buy them, but I assume you don't want to do that, so the best place to obtain war mounts is the battlefield. If a lord had elite cavalry units, such as the Cataphract or the Busalari, you'll get a small number of war horses from the battle itself, but your best bet is to waylay Aserai caravans. Unlike caravans belonging to the other factions, Aserai convoys are protected by veteran caravan guards, who are the only escort units that ride on actual war horses. For each mounted archer that you kill, there's a chance you'll get a lame Aserai horse which can be used to upgrade your soldiers into heavy mounted archers. Every time I attack desert traders, I make it my personal goal to kill these troops first. The rest of the loot is just a bonus. But anyway, to summarize everything I've said thus far, if your intention is to raid caravans and villages, mobility is key, so I advise that you form a solid, cavalry-focused warband, and if you still have some straggler infantry or archers, make sure that you have some spare mounts in your inventory for them to ride on. The best cavalry units for this playstyle are highwaymen, marauders, Khuzaite raiders, and Imperial Busalari. But any cavalry unit is good, they're all able to boost your travel speed, so if you have the opportunity to get some Mamelukes or Druzhniks in your party, don't turn them away. As for the aforementioned Sturgian cavalry unit, you can get a lot of Druzhniks by intimidating Sea Raiders into joining you and then training them with a perk. Before we move on, I also have to briefly mention mounted pillagers. Imagine a looter with a bow and a horse. That's exactly what these guys are. Cheap and disposable horse archers that you may obtain from caravan ambush quests. They cannot be intimidated or conscripted, but if you do one of these missions and you happen to knock a few of these guys out, they will eventually join your crew, like any other prisoner. Then again, if you're an outlaw, nobody will give you a job like this unless you make your way into a rebel town. But once you've amassed a big pile of ill-gotten gold and assembled a large party, you might have greater aspirations aside from extorting, robbing, or raiding your fellow countrymen. You might want to conquer a town, or maybe even the entire world. Now, you could just use a party of 100 horse archers to bait the garrison of an entire city into sallying out and meeting you on an open field, where they'd die of arrow poisoning before being able to catch your blood riders, but that isn't very safe. Because while you're preparing to lay siege to this castle, an army of thousands could ride to its defense, and if they have horse archers as well, you will lose your only advantage. Besides, even if you defeat the garrison, you will eventually have to defend the city from a reclamation army which is guaranteed to be larger than yours, and realistically, you will not be able to hold it down with just 100 men, unless you use exploits. But what if I told you, you don't have to defend every castle that you've conquered? Allow me to elaborate. When your clan reaches tier 4, you have the option of forming your own kingdom. However, in order to have a claim to the throne of Calradia, you will need to have proven your mettle by conquering a town or a castle. So if you don't have a lot of soldiers and you don't want to lose most of them in the assault, you shouldn't besiege a fort that's at full strength. What you should do instead is keep an eye out for a castle that's already under siege, and when the assault comes to an end, wait for the conquering army to depart. When you feel it's safe, lay siege to that castle yourself. If you can also build a battering ram and a siege tower before the assault begins, that's great, but if the army returns to defend its newly acquired land, you're better off rushing the assault with just ladders. If you've got a lot of ranged units, you can use what I've named the Arrow Storm Doctrine, and just lay them outside the walls of the castle and have them shoot the defenders on the walls. Eventually the enemy's morale will break and they'll scurry off, and you'll have scored yourself your first castle. Once that's done, form your own kingdom, enact the Royal Guard, Sacred Majesty, and 2 other policies that you might want, and then crown yourself Bandit King of Calradia. And once you've taken the castle, if the defenders close in, you can make one of 2 choices. If you think you can take them on, just wait in the fort and let them besiege it once more. But if you're greatly outnumbered, just leave and let them reclaim their castle. It's already fulfilled its purpose of making you king. On the day of your coronation, you'll see your party size spike from 100-something men to 200, maybe even more, so you will suddenly have a lot of vacant spots in your warband. At this point, speed loses its importance, whereas size becomes the main thing that matters. So use your 100 riders to conscript whoever. Peasants traveling to their markets, roving gangs of bandits, recruits you've abducted from random villages, and militias that fought back. It doesn't even matter if your new soldiers are cavalry or not. In fact, you should aim to hire as many footmen as possible because unlike the horsemen, they're easier to replace when you inevitably send them to their deaths. As you enlist more and more people, your warband will eventually reach its size limit, at which point you can assign one of your companions to be a general and give him as many soldiers as he can manage. Then you should form an army and take your companion with you and keep conscripting people until your party is full once more, after which you assign another companion, and you will do this one more time until your clan has 4 full parties that have been united into a single army. And if at some point your army takes a lot of casualties and you need a refill, and you've spotted a gang of bandits that you wish to integrate to your warband, you can disband the army to improve your travel speed, chase the miscreants, and when you take some distance from your clanmates, call them back to your army to have them follow you and prevent them from wandering into enemy forces and subsequently losing all the soldiers you worked so hard to amass. But there is a slight problem. As you do this, most of your new troops will be shit. Looters, hillmen, peasants, involunteers, and if you don't upgrade them ASAP, you're destined to a bitter defeat if you're attacked by a competent army. As I was saying a bit earlier, your soldiers need to at least reach tier 2 in order to be useful. So allow me to teach you how to properly train your troops. The classic way of training them is to simply take these lads into battle, and when they score some kills, they're entitled to a bit of the loot you take from your enemies. That share of the spoils is then converted into experience points, and when a recruit gains enough of those, he's ready to be upgraded into a slightly better soldier. With these 2 perks in stewardship, you can also force your troops to level up by donating them your own share of the loot. Only armor and weapons count, you can keep everything else because it makes no difference to them. A little side note about these perks. When this feature was introduced in the 1.6 patch, it worked flawlessly. But last time I played the game, if I donated an entire stack of weapons, it would only count as 1, and I had to discard each and every item individually, 1 by 1. That took a lot of clicks, and when I was done, only 10 of my 200 soldiers were trained, whereas in previous versions I could train almost everyone, provided I reached the XP limit indicated over here. I'm hoping that by the time this video is published, this issue will have been resolved and gear donations will work properly once more. But in case they don't, you've been warned. Also, I don't think you need to unlock these perks on your main character if you don't want to waste your focus points on stewardship. I'm pretty sure having a companion take this role for you is good enough, but do make sure to not risk him or her on the battlefield, because if your steward dies, you'll have to train a replacement all over again. Oh, and make sure this option is disabled. If it isn't, your genius companion may take the other perks, which are useless in comparison. With this option disabled, you get to choose how your clanmates develop their skills. When these perks worked as intended, I would always amass a lot of recruits and throw some of my loot at them to immediately take them to tier 2 and get them in fighting condition. My favorite tier 2 troops besides the Kuzate tribesmen are the Battanian clan warrior, which is the best low-level infantry available, the Vlandian Levi crossbowman, which is the deadliest tier 2 ranged unit, and the Imperial archer, which is widely available, very disposable, and can easily be trained into a fearsome heavy horse archer down the line. Special shout out to looters, who can be recruited en masse and quickly trained into a legion of Imperial footmen. Every single troop has their advantages and disadvantages, but the biggest advantage of tier 2 soldiers is how cheap, reliable, and replaceable they are. And if they survive long enough, they may even become elite units that will set the world on fire at your behest. And I nearly forgot, there is a third training regimen you can make use of: raiding bandit hideouts. I mean, you can attack these places to imprison the bandits, or you can use them as your local job center plus to attract new workforce for your growing enterprise. But if you don't care about recruiting new soldiers anymore and you wish to train the ones you already have, you can do it here. On the battlefield, you never know which of your troops manages to score some kills. And if you want to speed up the training of, let's say, 9 Imperial veterans, you just take them with you as you attack the hideout, and they are guaranteed to gain some combat experience and advance to the next tier, allowing you to turn them into mounted archers. After you and your clanmates assembled an army of about 400 people, it is time to conquer a city and establish a permanent base. Your base could be in any city that you like. I personally prefer Ortizia because number 1, it supplies Imperial troops, and number 2, because it's close to one of the most frequented ambush spots on the map. And to refresh your memory, those Imperial recruits you can snatch from the city or nearby villages can be given a bit of trash loot to instantly be transformed into Imperial archers, which are the cheapest and most reliable tier 2 units for castle defense. Anyway, conquering a city is tricky because unlike a castle, it's going to be heavily defended. So you could do what I recommended earlier and wait for another faction to siege this town for themselves and attacking it soon after, but that could take a while, so you might have to attack this town at full force. But if your army of 400 isn't strong enough to overwhelm the defenders, you might want to hire a mercenary clan to your cause. If you've got the influence, these mercenaries may even join your army and help you take the town. Now, I'm going to skip the siege itself and I'm gonna assume you emerged victorious. When you do, this city will become your home, where you'll be able to store your valuables, station excess troops, and use it to bait your enemies into attacking you and subsequently losing their heads. Now, I could go over all of that, but those subjects are better left for another video. A kingdom management guide or something of the sort. But establishing a headquarters is also relevant for the topic we're discussing today, because if you plan to conquer more towns and castles for your bandit faction, you might want to leave your cavalry home. Remember the Khan's guards I mentioned earlier and how I said a horde of those can bring the world to heel? Yeah, that was a bit of an exaggeration, because if you bring them in a siege, they'll be on equal footing with the defenders. Get it? Equal footing because they no longer ride their horses? I will not apologize for the pun because number 1, it's pretty damn good, you have to admit, and number 2, it reinforces the idea that you don't want to risk your cavalry in a place where they lose their biggest advantage. The final thing that needs to be done before you can conquer the world is making sure that the capital is well defended. So you've already stationed the horsemen in the headquarters garrison, as was mentioned earlier. But if they were left there to fend for themselves and you took the rest of your soldiers with you, that's not very smart. Because you have, what, 100, 150 units left back home? You can't hold a town with that many men, and I can guarantee that if you leave your cavalry all alone, the city will be sieged within a couple of days, and all your faithful knights will either be killed or taken captive. Do you really want to lose the horde of horsemen you've worked so hard to put together? I read your minds. Most of you answered no to that question, with a few rebels who said yes sarcastically. I have my eye on you. So if you don't want to lose the capital and the cavalry as soon as you've departed, you should station as many units as the garrison allows. And if you don't have enough soldiers and the garrison isn't full, take the riders with you and refill the army, then dump as many men into this city until the garrison is filled. However, before you do any of this, make sure that your capital has enough food to sustain such a large garrison, because if it doesn't, and your soldiers go starving, they'll simply quit their jobs without even writing their 2-week notice. To ensure that your town's food stocks are full, you can either manually empty the entire granary of each of the surrounding villages, or you can make peace with a few of your neighbors, and their caravans will start selling their food here because it's profitable for them. Oh, and this should go without saying, but recruits and volunteers are useless as defenders, so make sure they're upgraded to at least tier 2 if you want them to stand a chance against the invaders. With 600 men stationed in the garrison and another 200 militia ready to take up arms for their new overlord, your capital city will be almost unassailable. Even armies that are 1,000 strong will give this city a wide berth, because while in theory they could take it, victory would come at a great cost. And it can mean nothing for them if you just roll up with an army of 400 to stomp them and take back your town. Some madmen will still put some huge reclamation armies together. A horde of 1,500 tried to take my capital once. You know what I've done? I rode back to this city with my own army, sacrificed a portion of my troops to fight my way past the gate, and closed it shut behind me. Then I took charge of the defense and added another 350 units to our side. The 1,500 enemies were expecting to fight 800, but now there were nearly 1,200 of us, so we would fight more or less on equal terms. Needless to say, the attackers couldn't hope to best us in an assault, so they tried to starve us out. But I brought enough food to last us half a year, and soon they ran out of food. And as their numbers dwindled, they also started running away, trying to reach the nearest allied town for a resupply, but I grabbed a few of my mercenaries and rode out in front of them. When their army finally disbanded, I caught some of the stragglers and added a few more skull-shaped tankards to my mug collection. What I'm trying to get at is that once you have a base and are planning to go on a world conquest, it's best to leave your cavalry back home, along with a sizable garrison, and in their stead, take some cheaper, more disposable troops to throw at your enemies. Such a humongous garrison will cost a lot of money to maintain, but if you've followed the advice I've shared in part 2 of this guide, you'll be able to earn a lot of gold from the loot taken from your enemies. And not only will you be able to maintain the wages of your army and garrisons, but also turn a profit. All from waging endless war. But that is starting to sound like a topic that belongs in another video. And this one has been going on long enough. Way longer than I planned. But before we say our farewells, let's recap everything we've learned today. When a new campaign begins, especially if you're doing a rock bottom scenario and the world is completely hostile, you'll have nothing, so all you can do is fight for survival, obtain some basic weapons and try to capture a few looters. Then you'll recruit those looters and use them to fight peasants or mountain bandits, imprison those guys, and eventually your first gangmates will be entirely phased out of your raiding party in favor of more competent troops. Then you will raid your fellow Calradians until your clan grows, after which you'll conscript more people into your warband. Ideally, your raiding party will consist solely of horsemen, and with them, you'll be able to conduct larger and more profitable raiding operations until you eventually grow filthy rich. At some point, you'll reach Clan Tier 4, and when that happens, you shall take all the soldiers you can manage to capture a castle and crown yourself king. With the right policies in place, you will be able to grow your army to about 300 soldiers or more, hire a mercenary company or 2, and once all of that is taken care of, you'll be able to establish permanent residence into an actual town, which you'll do your best to defend. And whenever you want to conquer more towns, you will leave your horsemen back home and only take footmen with you, because in a siege, cavalry loses the biggest advantage they have, and they're much harder to replace than standard infantry. Anything that happens past this point is up to you, and if you want a guide on this subject, you'll have to wait until I've finished at least a few episodes of my own Raider campaign, which is going to be titled Bandits Ballads. I hope to see you fellers in that one. But I'm pretty sure that was all I had to say about the Raider playstyle in Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Of course, most of the knowledge I've shared thus far can be used on any playstyle, even if you're not a pure-blooded outlaw. If you're a mercenary, you will fight because you're paid to. If you're a merciful lord, you will be forced to fight. And if you're a corporate overlord, you will have to fight to protect the assets you've legitimately purchased from those that now want them back. And if war cannot be avoided, why not make some profit off of it? But I'm starting to go on a ramble again, and before that happens, we need to close this video. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you've learned something new today, and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.